Hi, it's Rob from robandphoto.com with a quick look at a beast of a lens I've been playing around with last week, the Hanimex 200mm f3.3 m42 manual prime lens. Look at this thing. Look at this thing. So, okay, first, for those who haven't watched these videos before, don't know what M42 is. M42 lenses are manual focus lenses that were made sort of from the 50s to the 80s that fitted older film SLRs that have a screw mount. So you know how your Canon or your Nikon or your Sony or whatever has a bayonet type mount, isn't it? You put it in and turn it. Well, these are a screw. You screw them on. And it was a kind of a standard used by people like Praktika, Pentax, I think, for a while. East German and Russian makes used M42 a lot. But the problem with M42 was that because it was a screw mount, it was very difficult that when we went to autofocus and auto aperture and things where the camera body controlled everything in the lens, you have to have electronics, don't you, so the camera can talk to the lens. But with a screw mount, it was quite difficult to do that, because the mount's quite small, and imagine, you know, with a screw mount, you know, when sometimes the screw might stop in the wrong place and it would wear out the contacts, etc. So M42 sort of disappeared, and we went to sort of the situation today where almost everybody has different types of mounts on their cameras. So these lenses are now available, and all you've got to do is buy something, say in this case an M42 to EF adapter. So it's a piece of metal that you can, I'll undo it, just about to see it there on the end. So what this has is, on one side it's got a thread there to engage with the M42, then on that side it's got a bayonet so it can fit my camera. And then with Canons, all you do is you put the lens on the camera, set the camera to aperture priority, the camera will see what light's coming in, and then adjust the shutter speed accordingly. So what's special about the Hanimex 200mm? Well, it's the fact that it is a 200mm prime lens. There's no zoom here at all. If you want to get closer or further away from your subject, you've got to move with your feet. Look at that glass. Look how big that is. It's absolutely massive. And it's an f3.3, so it lets in loads of light. If you think, I don't know, look at your, say something like, I don't know, the Canon 70-200 IS, blah blah blah, super duper lens that costs thousands of pounds. At its longest length, well, all throughout the length of it, it's f2.8. So f3.3, I don't think that's almost a stop darker, isn't it? But it's still letting in an awful lot of light. So when you're at 200mm, you can really do two things. You've got enough light to keep your shutter speed up at lower ISOs, and also you can isolate your subject. Now, the other thing that's great about using a big focal length lens like this is the fact that it really distorts the word, the image in front of you, because it compresses everything. Because in order to get the same framing with a 200mm lens that you would have, say, with a 50mm lens, or like an 1855 kit zoom, you've got to move a lot further away, because this thing's magnifying everything in your viewfinder. And what that means is your distance away from the subjects increases, which means that the relative distance, say, between two objects, so say that's your tree you're taking a photo, and that's something behind it that you want to be blurred. If you're taking it with a 50mm lens, you've got to be there to get the subject. But if you're shooting with a 200mm lens, you've got to be sort of this far away, which means that the relative distance between those two things compared to where you are is a lot less. So it means that you can really, those things will basically appear to be next to each other, whereas if you were shooting from here, they would appear to be further away from each other. And it's all to do with subject distance. But so that's what this kind of lens can do. It really compresses stuff. It means that when you're taking pictures of, say, buildings, because you've got to stand further away, they don't have all these, you know when you take a picture of a building and it kind of, the walls go like that. You know, they zoom away from you, don't they? Which is quite a pleasant look. But when you're using a 200mm, everything straightens up because you're standing further away. The 200mm on a 350D, 400D, 450D, Rebel XT, etc. Anything with a crop sensor is also further, although it's a 200mm lens, it's more like a 300mm lens, so it really is really telephoto that way. So it's quite an extreme look, and I find it a really tricky lens to use at the moment, because you know, you're just taking a tiny part of the scene in front of you and taking photographs of that. I haven't really had a chance to use it for any sort of portraits or anything. But there, it should be quite good, because the difficult thing about using this lens is that you've got to get your focus spot on. So there's my focus ring there, and then we've got our aperture ring for changing the aperture there, because it really does, you know, things that are a long way away that normally would be totally in focus with your standard type lens. With this one, you know, you've got to make sure you're spot on, because it's possible to throw things that are a long way away out of focus, you know, in terms of having the things behind them out of focus too. It really does isolate subjects, so I'm really looking forward to playing around with the 200mm Hanimex, and I'm just really chuffed that I managed to pick it up from a car boot for, I don't know, I think this one was about £5, I think, or something silly, because it's clean. There is a tiny little mark, I don't know if you can see it, there's a tiny little mark inside the lens, but that hasn't affected the affected the overall look of the pictures. What you do find with these old M42 lenses, though, they are particularly subject to lens flare. So when the sun's coming in, you can lose a lot of contrast in your photograph. So it's very important that you make sure that the hood is engaged. I mean, this one's really loose, so I've got to basically hold it in place. And you do find that if you want to avoid that kind of look, or avoid that type of lens flare, make sure the sun, you know, you're shooting relative to the sun. So if the sun's back here, make sure you're shooting that way. Don't try and shoot into the sun, because you'll get a horrendous amount of lens flare. But you know, that can be a cool look as well, cool retro look. So there we go. I'll put a few example photographs, just a couple on the end of the video, so you get an idea what it's all about. But there you go, the Hanimex 200mm f3.3 manual focus prime lens. If you see one at a car boot sale or a thrift shop, you know, have a look at the lens, make sure there's no fungus or anything growing inside it, make sure the aperture rings are nice and smooth, and make sure you press the button on the back and the focus ring is smooth, and get yourself one, because if you pick it up for a song, you know, imagine how much it would be to buy a proper autofocus Canon 200mm prime lens. A fortune. My name is Rob from robnunphoto.com. Thanks for watching.